Hello, everyone. Welcome to our event. For those of you who may not know me, I am Naya Joseph. I am the Community Events Manager here at ComSOAR and the Community Club. If this is not your first event, then you've definitely seen me around here, so welcome back. If this is your first event, thank you for coming to hang out with us, and I hope you check out the Community Club. I am really excited for today's event to be moderating this conversation as well. Our panelists have great insights to share with all of you. So I'm very, very excited. I'm going to ask everybody if you can, please introduce yourself in the chat. Would love to know your name, where you're calling in from, and what community you are either managing, building, or a part of. Would really just love to get an understanding of that and what you're also looking forward to learning or understanding during this event. Would love to get some insight into that as well, so that as we have this conversation, and the three of us are up here spotlighted, we're sort of moderating and guiding, but this is a conversation for everyone. So please be asking questions throughout. Please feel free to sort of share your insights in the chat as well. This is really, everybody here has something to contribute. We can all learn from each other. And so really want to foster that in the space today. But without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Isis. I'll have you introduce yourself first. So if you can just share your name, if you want to share your pronouns as well, mine are she, her, in case I didn't say that already, and your most recent or current role/title.
Awesome. So thank you for having me first and foremost. My name is Isis Miller. My pronouns are they, them. I am sitting here in Oakland, California, and my most recent role was the Community Experience Manager for Patreon. Currently, I'm working with local businesses here in Oakland to build events and experiences.
And I am Maceo, pronouns she, her, and currently I'm at DoorDash, wow. I was at DoorDash for 4 years, and that's crazy. I'm still saying that. Currently, I'm at Open Table and Kayak. I lead the ERG program as a whole, so all 5 ERG communities across both companies. A lot of people don't know that they're actually sister companies, so there's one ERG program that spans across them both.
Thank you, Isis and Maceo, for joining us today. And so obviously the topic of today's conversation is what's on the inside matters to building successful internal communities. So I'd really love to just contextualize this for the audience. Whoever wants to go first, how did you land in your current career? So how did you land in sort of the community and internal communities, industry in general? And how did you land in your most recent role as well?
I can go. I will give an abbreviated version. Long story short, I was an ERG leader at DoorDash once upon a time for the Black ERG. This was pre-pandemic, pre-Black Lives Matter movement that I first became an ERG leader. However, when all of those things that did happen, I definitely jumped in more than maybe usual. And it was definitely an all hands on deck effort, but I was all in. And I think that gave me, I was recognized by the company for the work that I was doing because I was so dedicated to helping communities, the Black community, really thrive within DoorDash. So by doing all that work, I was able to land a job on the people team, helping to lead the ERG program. And now I'm doing it full-time at Open Table and Kayak. So it's really just kind of by doing the volunteer piece and finding out that I love the community building. I love just helping people in general, that I was able to make it into a career.
Love that. I feel like every time I try to tell this story, I end up like telling my whole life story that nobody asked for. But for me, like I come from more of like an events background, and I got started in events pretty early, like even just working in coffee shops. Like for me, it was like, how do I create spaces where someone like me feels seen and heard and safe and like valued? So like, yeah, it was like, I'm like this like nerdy, queer, Black, trans person. And I'm like, I don't see stuff that's like centering, what my experience is or the things that I'm interested in. And I was like, well, if it ain't there, build it. So getting started in that and having that sort of mindset is translated throughout my career is just being inside of companies and being like, well, we need some events that speak to even our marginalized folks and not just the majority. And so started to create events around that. And similar to Maceo, got involved with the ERG communities at WeWork. And I was like, whoa, like finding your people really impacts your experience as an employee. And it made me want to stay. And I'm like, if that's a sick case for me, then it must be the case generally. Finding your people makes you want to stay in a company and obviously aids in retention, which is obviously helps the bottom line of a business. And so, yeah, like similar to Maceo, again, like being part of ERGs, being recognized for the work within ERG communities allowed me to really pivot and create a whole experience around employee experience, which I didn't even, know was a thing. I was like, oh, okay, that's what's up. So yeah, that's my long story that got short story that got long.
I love everything that you just shared there. And I think that's a common thread too when we see people in the community industry, whether it's internals or external community, that there is sort of that personal component to it. Like it really does typically start with thinking about your own experience and trying to create spaces, particularly with sort of the identities that we have on this panel today, like trying to create spaces for those of us who may feel more marginalized or underrepresented. I was just sharing with someone recently, I always tell people my informal introduction to community is I'm the oldest of four. I have three younger sisters. And all of us identify as queer Black women. And so that has shaped a lot of our experience and the conversations that we've had within the context of our own family. But they've sort of served as my North Star in that when I've thought about when I first entered into the workplace, because I started my career on the HR team before I pivoted into external community and events. I was really thinking about like, how do I create workplaces and spaces that I would be proud and comfortable bringing my sisters into? How do I create a world that is really accepting of them because they're coming right behind me? And so I love what you shared today. And really to your point too, like it does impact the business. And so we'll get into that a little bit. I think that actually goes perfectly into sort of my next question, which is how have you really gotten your organizations, and if either of you have really kind of been in the startup space as well, like speaking to that experience, how have you gotten that investment or buy-in into these internal community events and into things like employee resource groups?
I think a huge hack of it was when all of these movements were happening back to back, it kind of externally not forced, but it definitely pushed the company to say, oh, we need to at least look like we care about employee experience in communities. And for most companies, that's kind of where it stopped. They may set up ERGs and things like that, and it doesn't really go much further than that. However, if an ERG leverages that, some ERG leaders, they'll call out companies and say, okay, so you started this. Now, how are you all actually making change for us? Like just having this and like giving us no budget or giving us no structure, not investing in it is not going to go anywhere. So really and I was able to see that firsthand in a startup environment where there were communities, not just internally, but even, for instance, as an ERG leader, I was able to set up a Dasher community for Dashers of color at DoorDash. That being said, the Dashers of color brought up some issues that the business was like, oh, I don't know if I'm ready to address, but you have to be that person. And truly, most of the time, people who are leading a community, they are people who truly care about seeing change and seeing things get better. So just being able to say like, okay, you set up this community. They said they don't feel safe while dashing. They said that there are some restaurants that don't let them go to the bathroom, like, and it's like a race issue. So now what are we doing about it? So yeah, and there's definitely some learnings there in terms of like how to approach certain teams respectfully, like not stepping on toes, but still saying like, okay, I have a proposal for you all on some things that we can do, and here's how it can impact your metrics, and it can be mutually beneficial for us. So a lot of learnings that went on, still ongoing, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it really, when it comes to getting buy-in from leadership, around these things. It's about the bottom line for them. I mean, we can make the emotional plea and appeal to their humanity and hope that that works. And you know, sometimes that does. But then for me, I think the most effective strategy was to show strategy and really like show them the numbers of how it impacts the business. So it's, you know, modeling back to them that like, if we're trying to keep up with competition, we're looking at like 90% of Fortune 500 companies have, you know, active ERGs. So we're showing them that like how it impacts like their ability to recruit top talent. So if you're looking at referrals, for instance, if you like folks who are referral, you see 47%, I think, around like greater satisfaction with their job. So they stay longer. So you show them like if they're trying to recruit, you know, Gen Z folks, they have studies that show, I think like 70% of Gen Z respondents said that they were more likely to join a company that had an active ERG. So it's really like showing them and connecting the dots to their bottom line, to their business strategy, to their goals, and like showing them the bridge of like, to Maceo's point, like our ERG folks are the most active people in your company. They're the most engaged people in your company. How can you leverage them as advocates for for the business and its goals overall? So I think that's such a huge thing of getting that buy-in is, yes, that emotional appeal, look at the world around us, who are we, and forcing them to live up to the values that they espouse, and then show them how it impacts their pockets at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And to your point, like one of my favorite like pieces of data is actually from SHRM that says just even making like one friend in the workplace, having just one connection increases retention 6 times. And so I feel like ERGs and internal community building, like that is why, like it really does impact just the ability, your desire to stay somewhere. And that means so much because to your point again about like engagement and being active and being an advocate, like it really starts with like, do I even want to be here? And again, that often starts with, do I feel connected to the people that I'm working with and collaborating with on a regular basis, not just in a professional sense, but sort of on that personal level as well. So I love the points that
you raised. I saw this quote recently, and it was like, how you define culture. It's like, how you feel about your job on Sunday night. And I was like, that hits, because like, you know, like for me, I was like, why am I dreading this every Sunday? Why do I have just anxiety? Why is this? And that really speaks to what is your culture? How do your employees feel the night before they're about to start a new week? Are they excited? Or they're like, oh, I'm gonna go see my work bestie, all of that. Like that is such an indicator. And that really was something to think about. But yeah, like I love my work bestie. I met my soulmate at work, and I was like, I will stay at this company forever so I can kiki with this person. But yeah.
Yes, I love everything that you all just mentioned. And I think to your point, and Maceo in particular, if you can sort of shed some light on this too, are there specific ways that you've sort of been measuring sentiment, getting that qualitative data? What questions are you asking to really gauge, or what data are you pulling to gauge how people are not just sort of interacting and engaging and getting all those numbers, but how are you checking in on how people are feeling as they're becoming a part of these communities?
Yeah, there's definitely a few ways. And I think that it's both qualitative and quantitative. I think so, like number one, obviously I encourage doing surveys, but a big thing that comes with doing surveys and things like that is that there has to be action upon them. Like if people feel like I just like poured out my heart and soul and told you all like I need more of this and you didn't action upon it, they're going to be less likely to respond at all, much less like with that much honesty the next time. So that's what I'll put out there. But in addition, just even in terms of like quantitative data, so I'm a big fan of Slack. Slack has so many ways. One thing is by looking at the Slack analytics, you can see within your Slack channel how many people opened up a Slack channel. So that's a good way to even see like, do people view this community as a resource? Because if they're not even opening up the Slack channel, and it shows you within the past 30 days. So over the past month, like only 50% of our community has even opened the channel. That's big. Another thing that you can see too is how many people used an emoji reaction or commented in the channel, things that would be so strenuous to do live. like to count and see like, okay, how many people responded to each one. It'll tell you over the last month, only 20 people responded or like did an emoji when you have 500 people in your channel. And oftentimes that's what we see with ERGs anyway. There's a huge amount of like an influx of people that came and who want to support, but there's no action behind it. It may not be on them. That might be them communicating to you that as a community leader, there needs to be something different to get them engaged. But you wouldn't know it if you don't look at the data and the metrics. So I'm a big fan of checking Slack metrics. Honestly, like we do it bi-weekly where we're seeing what is the engagement level, what's the percentage of people, because it really is not about how many people are in your community, but really by looking at how many of those people that are here are coming back, how many of them are moved to like it feels like a small thing, like using an emoji reaction, but truly that's them saying like, I resonated with this meant something to me, and now I'm moved to action. And when I think of the word engaged, that's kind of what comes to mind anyway, is them being moved to do something. So even saying things like that, there's ways that your community can communicate with you without it necessarily having to be a survey.
Mhm. And I see we have a question from Judy in the chat. These survey tips are great. Who are the owners that analyze and evaluate survey data for solutioning?
The ERG leaders. I mean, truly, I lead an ERG program. So I'll say I can help coach around that, but I wouldn't know if there's a community that I'm not part of. I'm not the best person to say like what the solution is, quote unquote. However, I can help them say like, okay, well, what does this mean? If let's even pivot a little bit from Slack, but even like with Zoom events, being able to see the percentage, like how long do people stay on the event? What was your watch percentage? If it's low, what does that mean? Does it mean that it's like you scheduled it at the wrong time? Does it mean that it's the wrong type of content? You can see how many, specifically who showed up to the event with Zoom data as well. So it's like, was this for the wrong audience that you were promoting this to? So I can help coach that, but I definitely would encourage the leads themselves to dive into it. And in addition to that, I just had a really good thought and it went out of my head. Helping to coach them, it'll come back. But yeah.
I think we did it a little. So definitely, I think the surveys for ERG communities are super helpful. But we used to do a company-wide survey, and I know most companies do that as well. But finding questions within your overall culture surveys, finding benchmark questions for that to correlate your data, I think will be super helpful as well. So like tracking like questions like, oh, do you see yourself working here for the next 2 years? Finding those benchmark questions and measuring those over time, I think as well, to show the impact on like, oh, see how ERG events are growing and increasing in engagement, and you're seeing also this engagement across the board company-wide. So as much as you can, correlate the data with the company-wide questions as well to see how those things impact one another.
Mhm. Definitely. That was such a great point to raise. And Christy has a question. I'm going to assume this is for you, Maceo, but do you just use Slack analytics info, or are you using an additional tool to analyze metrics?
Just Slack analytics info. Like I'll say this. The platforms themselves will provide this information for free. So Slack will give you that data. Zoom will give you those Zoom reports. However, what are you doing with it after? I'll say just like my biggest tip is to put it in one like comprehensive Google sheet, if that's what you use, Google Sheets. For me, my favorite tool is Google Data Studio, free, completely free. Most people don't know it exists. I literally went on YouTube and learned how to use it, because it's not just about having spreadsheets of data, but now it's like, okay, I need to be able to see what this means. I need to be able to visualize what this data means, and also make it that much easier for when I do communicate with leadership and talk about the impact of our ERG. They need to be able to easily understand what metrics we're working with. So I just built like a dashboard within Google Data Studio that shows like, okay, this is the percentage of the company that's engaged with ERGs or that have ever even been to an ERG event. Here's the percent, and here's the breakdown by department, what that looks like by tenure. So that's like an external tool that I would recommend. Like I said, it's completely free. Most people don't even know that it's part of their Google Suite.
And definitely like understand what it is, the story you're trying to tell and what metrics are important to you. I think one thing that was a really powerful tool for us was like how it relates to recruitment efforts. So really encouraging your ERGs to partner with your recruiters and creating programs around that will allow you to get really incredible data and saying like, oh, well, these folks who are participants in ERGs actually, you know, put out this number of referrals, which resulted in this many hires, which impacted our DEI goals in this way. But that was one that was really, really helpful for us as well.
And just a quick question from Jay, is Google Data Studio the same as Google Analytics?
Not the same, but you can use Google Analytics to filter into Google Data Studio. Google Data Studio is just the visualization of it, but like almost anything can be on the back end. Like I just have a spreadsheet on the back end of mine because I'm not, like I said, I learned this on YouTube University. I'm not with Google Analytics yet, but just so you know, you can also use that as well. And I really like the point that you just made too, Isis, about making sure that you know the story that you want to communicate. Part of that too, with having a community, especially around like these around like underrepresented marginalized groups, there's so much progress to be made in general that you might want to like do everything. Honestly, it's like when the business asks you like, what do you want to accomplish, you're like, are you kidding me? Like there's like 50,000 things to accomplish. But it is important, that being said, to like hyper focus on like 1 to 2 things. This way you can truly move the needle on it. And that's what you can also double down on when it comes to measurement and things like that. It'll also help to get that buy-in that we were talking about earlier, because now you're not all over the place with like 50 different things. It's like, no, this year we're only about 2 things. So how can you all help us with this? And how can you all helping with this help you in return at the same time? I always say, if you confuse, you lose. So if you confuse people in terms of what you're about, you will lose their attention, lose their buy-in. So yeah.
Absolutely. Like, and really anchoring, to your point, just anchoring those 1 or 2 things back to the company goal. And I think that also is where we get into like the importance of having an executive sponsor comes into play, and having them as your sort of your ally, and they understand your goals, they've helped you identify those goals, and they know the impact of those goals will go like such a long way in that buy-in and increasing that trust between leadership and their community and their ERGs.
I love it. So I know I'm listening to the conversation that's going on, and I also noticed that earlier in the conversation, I think it was Carolyn who had commented and sort of said like they're in the process of actually making sort of getting buy-in for ERGs. So I want to take a step back and even just ask, before you sort of get this buy-in, like before ERGs really exist, before these communities like formally exist, how can organizations, how can these startups, how can these companies support and invest in internal community building early on? If you don't have a formal structure quite yet, and Isis, I know you spoke about in your early experience, really kind of doing this like at coffee shops and really just in your early positions, like how are you sort of setting the stage for these foundations and these formal structures to be built before they exist?
I mean, it's about building trust, right? And like making sure that your company doesn't fall into practices that undermine that trust. So like treating employees like human beings and not just resources. Like that is how you start to build community internally at the very beginning, like getting involved even in your external community, encouraging your employees to be community minded, period, will start to build that trust. Identifying your values, who you are as a company early on, and then allowing those values to be steeped into the culture, like asking for input and feedback. So like, I think that's a huge trust builder. They feel valued just in saying management is coming to me asking me my opinion on how we need to be moving. like these sorts of practices. So it's about these practices and the foundation of those practices that then you can build, that becomes the soil on which you can start to build healthy communities.
Mm. Can't say it any better than that.
I love that. I love that so much. And we have another question in the chat from Patricia. How have you addressed ERG leadership burnout? It's a lot of work for those that are leading events, doing the communications, and particularly in instances where ERG leadership is voluntary and separate from their main job. That's a great question.
I don't
You
wanna
need a whole session on ERG leadership burnout. You better go ahead and talk.
I can really nerd out on this topic because I mean, I feel it. Like I said, I was a Black at DoorDash ERG leader during the Black Lives Matter movement. And DoorDash, not only is it a fast moving startup, but obviously that time just had so much going on, and the business really wanted a lot out of the Black ERG, go figure, at the same time. So trust me, I've been burnt out myself, but I've also come out of it. I've also helped other ERG leaders to like not be in that position. And that's been one of my main focuses here at Open Table and Kayak. So I'll say a few things. Is one, understanding that the things that cause ERG leader burnout, it's feeling like you're doing all this work and it's meaning nothing. More or less, that's kind of the emotions behind it. So having the metrics that we talked about earlier is really big, because this way ERG leaders will be able to see the progress that they're making. It might not be like a mile, but even just being able to say like, we accomplished like a few things this year, like numbers wise. We didn't like double our Slack community numbers, but we improved it by 10%. And that's still, I mean, honestly, when you have the numbers, it's really like an ego booster a little bit. It's a resume add too on top of that. So being able to give the ERG leaders and say like, this is the progress that you are making. This is impactful work. And here's what you have to show for it. That's one big thing, because if they feel like, well, we still haven't accomplished all of our 50 million things that we have, it's like, well, you did make progress on it. And it's really not a rush. I think that too, as an ERG leader, it feels like you, it's an enormous weight on your shoulders and you feel like you need to accomplish everything super quick, but really just kind of level setting with the ERG leads and saying like, it's a marathon, not a sprint. I think that's what they say. So any progress we make is progress. So that's part of it with the numbers. But another piece too would be kind of realigning them to why they're doing the work and tuning them in with their community. Sometimes as an ERG leader, it's really easy to get so into your zone that you're no longer connected with the community. It's like you're throwing all events that you want to throw, and then you get like really bummed out when it doesn't work out like you thought. But now it's like, maybe we just need a refresh and just understanding, why do we exist? What's our purpose here? Once again, having those focuses that you have, that'll also help. So yeah, I would say too, if there are any other program managers, overall, having a strategy for your ERG where they can see like, this is the path that our ERG program is going down is big, because maybe ERG, like they don't see the end. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. They don't see this journey and this progression, but really being able to say, this is the stage that we're at currently with our ERG program. This is where we're trying to go. And these are the steps that we're taking to get here. This year, we'll only take one step, but it's a big one. And here's how you can contribute to us accomplishing that. So this way they're aligned with you and your thinking, but they're also like, okay, now I don't feel the pressure to get all these things done. For me personally, like, since I've been at Open Table and Kayak, I've just restarted the ERG program. Yeah, anyway. So yeah, just restarted it. I feel like it's just easier sometimes than trying to patch all the holes. But when you do that, when I was doing that, I'm telling them this year is really just about focusing on building that community feel, like getting back in touch with your ERG's members and your purpose, and your vision and things like that. Next year, we'll focus on improving the experience for the members. So this year is just about like getting in touch with what they want, and just increasing the overall reach of the program. Next year, we'll really be doubling down on like not just how many people show up to events, but how many people return to events, retention, things like that. We're not ready for that, but that's something that you can anticipate. So it also gives ERG leaders something to be excited for in the future. I'm trying to, yeah, I'll leave it at that. I could really nerd out on that for sure.
Yeah, that's just such a relevant topic that we just hear across the board. Folks are burnt out, and it makes absolute sense. And I think, you know, to your point, it's just like it comes from spinning your wheels and feeling like you're getting nothing done. So, like having a strategy in place, identifying 1 to 2 actionable goals, like those two things will really help you see, to your point, that light at the end of the tunnel and the incremental changes that are going to get you there. That's not to say that it's going to take away the frustration from doing unpaid labor. That's but also maybe there are ways that you can work with, you know, leadership in your company prior to getting, you know, getting the change of getting folks paid, of ways to recognize their work in other ways, even whether it's at the all hands or whatever that is. Like recognizing and giving props to those folks can also, you know, just give a little energy back to you and see that like your work is not, you know, unseen by the company and leadership.
Definitely. And Jose, I know you have a question. I'll just add a tidbit real quick before I get to you. But I also wanted to add in here, and this is more so speaking from just, I guess, my personal experience in HR and sort of leading external communities, and events are very overwhelming and can contribute to a lot of burnout as well. And something I always tell people, in addition to sort of being an experience curator, as I call myself, I am very much a self-care enthusiast. I think that it is really difficult to pour from an empty cup. And so I always encourage anybody who's taking on anything additional in the workplace to take care of yourself. Like that's something, when I've had direct reports, like I've mandated like 1 mental health day a month. Like you need to make sure that you've checked out at least at one point, giving yourself a long weekend, taking some time. I think finding that time to take care of yourself makes it a little bit easier to take care of others and contribute to the development and community building with others. So I think that is also a huge part of it, is like really finding a way and encouraging your organization to prioritize mental and emotional health and wellness of employees in tandem with building these internal communities. Because I think like part of community wellness, communities are made up of individuals. So part of community wellness, part of a community being able to thrive, is those individuals feeling well and being able to thrive as well. So wanted to throw that in there as well. But Jose, I want to get to your question too. So please go ahead.
Thank you. And it's not necessarily a question, I have more of a comment, because I sort of get triggered when that topic comes up, because when we go back to the original, to the how ERGs came about, right? They were created by a group of I think Black employees, and I don't know if it was FedEx, and in a certain company. And so like they're meant to be resources for employees, right? And nowadays it's like companies are taking them as like, oh, great, you know, we want to put this on our website, we want to attract talent, we want to like do things. And so you mentioned the unpaid labor, and I'm so not about that. You know, these groups are leadership incubators, and they're not seen as that. And I'm trying to, you know, like wherever I have a chance to influence it, I'm trying to get leaders to understand that these are leadership skill building incubators, and that those people need to be recognized for the skill sets that they're building. And ERG work needs to be recognized for, you know, that work needs to be implemented into our development plans. It's not separate. And I'm currently fighting this battle at my current company, that there's this sort of myth and notion out there that ERG work is done on your lunch break and it's done on weekends and, you know, after work hours. And no, you're going to put it on the website and take credit for it. You got to credit the employees that are doing the work. And so recognize the development skills that they're building, recognize the leaderships that they're building, the leadership skills that they're building by doing this work, and you know, pay for that labor, and credit the skill sets that are, and recognize the skill sets that are being sorry, I'm only on coffee but and you can tell I'm passionate about this, but like that's where I think it needs to be. And so we need to move the conversation away from what are the ERGs achieving for the company, and also recognize the skill sets and the work that the people that are actually doing the work. So like that would go a long way toward avoiding that burnout. Is if those people actually feel recognized for the work that in their effort and their labor. Because I've had the experience where I feel great within the ERG space and working with those people, and then I go back to my day work, and nobody knows what's been going on at the ERG. Nobody recognizes the work that's going on at the ERG, and that you can't live those two lives.
I completely agree. I think, as Black and brown folks, we know a lot about unpaid labor, and that is not what we're trying to do, nor is it anything that we want to promote. But the fact is that it is a long road for a lot of companies to get to the point where you have to educate them, meet them where they are and educate them, unfortunately, as we've always had to do as Black and brown folks, to see the value in our labor. And that is sad, but it is a fact. And so when it comes to thinking about the ways that companies can leverage the work of ERGs, it's about playing that game. It's a business at the end of the day. And so the strategy, when I say oh, what are we doing for the company, and having ERGs anchored to that, because that's what you can then use to take to leadership and say, this is how it impacted your bottom line on this way, this way, this way, and this way. You had to spend less on hiring because retention was up. You had to do, we got you recruitment. So being able to show your work, show the value in your work, and anchoring that to the business, that's how you're going to get your money. Because you can say this is how it's impacting you, and then you can strategize and work with them. And if they can see that value, then that's how we're going to get bonuses and employee recognition, and have that included on your evaluations and things like that. But you have to speak their language, so to speak. You have to have strategy behind it. You have to anchor it to business goals. If you don't, they're always going to see it as a hobby. They're always going to see it as you kicking it with the homies at work. If you don't do that, it will fail, and it will breach the trust between these groups and leadership. And so for me, it's we know what we're doing. We know the value in this. How do I then storytell to show it to them and make sure that I get my money and get paid and recognized for what we do? But unfortunately, it is a long journey, because a lot of leadership just has outdated ways of thinking about community. They have outdated ways of thinking about ERGs. And so for it literally took me writing a white paper on the matter to shop it around to executives, creating strategies, creating communications plans. I had to do a lot of homework, and I do mean written reports and evaluations, and showing them the Bloomberg reports, and showing them the Harvard Business Reviews, showing them all of that data, just for them to see what we were doing for the company for free. You're welcome. But at the end of the day, I'm also doing it for me and my people, to make sure that, to Naya's point, I got sisters and brothers coming up, and I don't want to see another person who looks like me or shares my identity, or as another marginalized person, coming into this company and not feeling safe. And I don't want to not feel safe. So it is for us, but it has to also be for them too. You know what I mean? So it's that bridge building.
I love that. And just to add to that with the recognition piece, a good thing is that recognition can take place in a few different forms. Ideally, I feel like a fully developed ERG program, and just to be clear, a lot of ERG programs are not there yet. There's in terms of a progression model, a lot of ERGs will probably be at a 2 or 3 out of 5. But for a fully developed one, definitely paid ERG leaders, all the things. But in the meantime, there are still smaller things that can be done that will recognize the ERG leaders. Number one, being able to understand that people like to be recognized in different ways. Not everyone truly thrives off of financial compensation too. There's a book I read around love languages and how that shows up in the office space, but some people want shared experiences. So something like an ERG summit, huge. It's wow, this really makes me feel seen. Some people like words of affirmation. So being able to hear from an executive in a public forum, oh, this person did this great work, that might be something that really resonates with them. So even just incorporating maybe a little bit of each of those 5 love languages along the journey until you get to the financial compensation point, if that's like the harder conversation, implementing those along the way can still help your ERG leaders feel seen and feel important. Yeah, just wanted to add that too.
1000%.
Yep,
Yeah, I
I
remember
love
when we first started creating the ERG Summit, and like how much energy our leaders like got from that, just to know that the company was, you know, maybe not ready to do the compensation piece, but ready to take on, you know, 2 to 3 days of sitting with them and having conversation with them and hearing from them and having resources poured into them and flying them out and doing all of those things can really help folks feel seen in their work. And I think at the end of the day, like, that is the goal, is to just to feel like you're belong and you're cherished and you're valued. But yeah, good point.
definitely. And I see Patricia, did you have a question or comment as well?
Thank you so much. I appreciate the space. I happened to come across it and I was like, oh my God, I have to attend because we're experiencing some burnout. And I did have a question about what sort of models many of you have come across in this space as it relates to having like 50 different ERGs for every single case out there. And I do believe that there's something to be said about power in numbers and collective, you know, common ground that can build a stronger community and even give us sort of a stronger voice. Can you share, if you have come across these different models, can you share how those are structured? As it stands today, we're dealing with these separate ERGs for Latinx, African American, LGBTQ+, so on and so forth. And it can be, you know, it's a lot. And sometimes fighting for that space, fighting for where perhaps certain ERGs have different priorities than others. So just wanted to get some insight if you have any experience, pros or cons, either way.
I have a strong opinion on this. It's a very strong one. Even just when it comes to chapters in general, and it's relative to the company size, but for companies with like less than 15,000 employees, I'll even say, I am not a fan of like chapters or super small ERG groups. Not a fan of it. I feel like you have to perfect one thing before you start scaling it and trying to duplicate and replicate that thing. Otherwise, you're scaling something that's broken. So that also would apply when it comes to having these super niche communities, especially if you're going to formalize them and call them ERGs. And I've seen some companies literally with 50 ERGs for not as chapters. Like there's not there, for instance, there may be specifically a trans ERG. There might be specifically a Haitian African or Haitian American. No, it wouldn't be called Haitian. Well, no, that too, because there might be a Haitian ERG, but then there might be Haitian American. It's like very, very niche, where maybe there might happen to be like 10 other employees that are Haitian American specifically, but can you imagine as a Black ERG being able to say, regardless of the fact, this is something that we have in common here, we can do intersectional programming. Like there's so much, number one, there's intersectionality, yes, within all these groups, and having the ERG leaders like really double down on that in their programming. But even on another note, being able to focus on the different dimensions of that community, or even having your ERG leaders for the broader groups. And I'm not a fan of huge ERGs like people of color, but things like, you know, just, I feel like there's like a general, like maybe 10 to 12 core ERGs that every company should have. With those, have the ERG leaders list the dimensions that are within that community. So now, yes, it's a Black ERG and it includes Haitian American, it includes Black British, it includes all the different things. But by them seeing maybe a list of all the micro communities that are in that, it can have them be a little bit more creative when it comes to programming. So it's not just homogenous to just the African American community. So that's what I'll say. I'm really not a fan though of scaling broken things, because then eventually you're going to have to fix it, thing one. So you're going to have to break down all of those different chapters. And I'm seeing a lot of companies do that now, where they're having to go back, and that brings confusion and things like that. But definitely there's strength in numbers. So yeah.
I think when you have like 50 ERGs at a company, that to me signals that there are no processes for becoming an ERG. And I think that's part of the problem, is that like you just calling yourself an ERG is not enough to be an ERG. Like there should be formal processes in place that says at this number, we are an ERG. So we have, whatever it may be, identify, 20 people we have 20 people, we have a charter, we have 2 leads, we have a treasurer, we have an executive sponsor. I believe that every ERG should have an executive sponsor. That's just me. And I think once you start to narrow down what your qualifiers are for becoming an ERG, you'll stop seeing 50 ERGs, because most people won't be able to meet the qualifications to do that. And that'll weed out who's serious and who's not about the work, because there's just a difference between a social group and an ERG, that they're just 2 different things and 2 different goals. And I think that for me, that's what I would do, is like, okay, now we're going to put in place guidelines, a playbook, a real understanding of what an ERG is, and go back to the drawing board on what they're trying to accomplish. Because it's just going to result in what you're saying, is there are going to be a lack of resources. Like, employees won't be able to attend 50 different events by 50 different, groups. And then it muddies the water. It just dilutes the work of the ERGs as a whole, when there are so many that way, and you end up not having power. And so when you only have 10 people doing this, and they're all, the more we band together, the more we find opportunities for intersectionality, the greater the result, the greater the impact. And so that would be my advice around that.
I love everything that you both just shared. And to that point too, of just like, there is a difference, Isis, to what you just said, of like ERGs and social connection and social groups. Like, I think also just unpacking, like, is it that you're really just looking for an opportunity to connect with other folks, or do you really sort of need this formalized structure, sort of consistent programming? Because I've been at organizations where, like, again, to Maceo's point as well, like, I've been at a startup that had less than 100 people. ERGs made no sense. Like, there was literally not enough numbers. But there was still that desire for community. There was still that desire to celebrate different like histories and cultures and backgrounds, and have that be shared out with like a wider group. And so we pivoted our happy hours. We had always kind of had happy hours in the organization, and really started looking at them as opportunities to acknowledge like different historical and heritage months. And so for Black History Month, for example, we did a happy hour. It was open to the entire company, but it was like a jazz dinner. So we had a jazz singer, because that jazz music is very influential and important, and really kind of catalyzed within the context of the African American community. But to your point about intersectionality, we did a diaspora dinner. So we had food from DR, we had food from Haiti, Jamaica, African American food, and not just kind of sharing the food out on the table, but the menu provided context into why these foods were selected. Because like one of the foods on the table was fried chicken. That can be seen as stereotypical by some. Many also don't know fried chicken was the first food that was ever commercialized in the United States by freed Black people when they could not get work, they were selling their food. So that is actually incredibly important to the historical context of the Black community, and something that many people don't understand. And so we used it as an opportunity to kind of educate and clarify, but still celebrate and involve and create this opportunity for social connection. So I do think, kind of to the point of events and experiences, not to just plug that in there too, but you can use that as a way to make sure that people are still getting what they might ultimately hope to get out of a more formalized ERG and internal community structure.
And there's nothing wrong with having these as affinity groups where they are these social spaces, and those can be things that ERGs then leverage. Like we at a previous company, there was like a cosplayer affinity group. There was like all these different like small things, where now like the Black ERG did a collaboration with that affinity group, which didn't get budget, so they just got together informally or did fun things. But now they can say like, okay, let's do I think we did like an anime blurred trivia, Black nerd trivia. So that way it's like, okay, there is this community that exists, and now we can tap into that to increase our engagement. So as these in very informal groups where it's just about like people connecting on a common interest, because I've also seen that too, where common interest groups can become ERGs when they're not. So back to Isis's point, even just about clarifying what is an ERG, and what is not an ERG too. That might help too.
Thank you so much. That was really awesome feedback. I just think, from seeing the ERGs, even between, we're always trying to find common ground and that intersectionality. And especially most recently with everything that happened in LA, it sort of brought to surface the difficult relationship that exists between the immigrant community and African American community. And even just from a Latinx perspective is one side, but just the immigrant, as Naya just mentioned, not knowing the history of perhaps this fried chicken of someone who comes from another country completely. So I think, and that's educating us and helping us really see one another. So I think there's some opportunity. So thank you for your feedback.
Thank you for your question. And I see we have another question from Isabel in the chat, and we're on the topic of thinking about engagement anyway. So Isabel asked, I'm sure when your employee engagement activities don't get enough traction, you iterate. But I'm curious, what is to sort of understand more, what is your approach when this happens? How are you iterating and figuring out what sort of employee engagement tactics actually do work?
I can go. I feel like I'm talking a lot. Thing one, I always will start with this, looking at the data in terms of seeing what did work and what didn't. And that way, and also data will show you the areas of opportunity. So for instance, we were able to see like our marketing team wasn't as engaged in ERGs, like they weren't attending events as much. So our Pride ERG for Pride Month, they brought in a nonprofit that talks about LGBTQ representation in media, and that brought a lot of the marketing team in. So not only is there now something that not only are there now a lot of new members from that team, but the marketing team later even brought back that vendor just to speak as a mandatory training for their team. So making it personalized, making it relevant to the employees and to what they do. Once again, we kind of talked about this earlier, even with the business impact piece, but by making it relevant and saying, by you learning about this, it's actually going to benefit you. And we all know, I mean, everyone on this call knows, like, obviously making more inclusive product or for the business to be more inclusive does benefit everyone, but sometimes it needs to be spelled out. So really by having the ERG leads come up with creative initiatives that target a specific demographic or group at the company. Like I said, it can be by department, it can be by tenure potentially. So maybe there's like a new hire ERG event or something like that. In addition, just having a list though, I mentioned earlier, a list of like the dimensions of the community, because now if they're like, okay, I don't know what to do next, well, now you have another, like, just choose a dimension of your community that you haven't tapped into before. Maybe make a list of community pain points that your community is facing. So now you can just combine potentially, like, okay, let's do Black, British, and then for the Black community, we have like financial wellness as one of the pain points. So let's do like financial wellness with the speaker specifically from the UK. And now we're able to like creatively niche these events too. So just kind of by combining some of those things. But if you have a list for your ERG leads, it makes it that much easier for them to like pick out things that they can try the next time. But also just like giving them the safe space to be creative and to fail, quite frankly, because some events are not going to work and some speakers are not great. But by sometimes companies really can discourage ERG leaders by like really being aggressive and saying like, oh, that was terrible and all this stuff, and not really giving any constructive feedback. But by giving them space to fail and to iterate, that'll also help them to remain creative in their programming.
Absolutely. I think I've also heard you say this, Maceo, before, but what isn't being measured can't be changed. So you have to be looking at what are your goals, like where isn't it working? So if you're tracking like even down to your comms plan, right? Like, when are you communicating your events? How are you communicating your events? Because it might not even be the event itself that didn't work, but maybe they didn't even know about it. Maybe it wasn't in the right channels. Maybe it wasn't being talked about at the right time to the right people. So it really is, it's about identifying where the miss was. Like I said, it might not even be the event itself. And yeah, we have to just be looking at those metrics and keep trying and keep iterating. And like, to Maceo's point, is just like involving folks. Like I always say that I build with and not for. Talk to folks. Why didn't you come to the event? Pull some folks aside. It doesn't always have to be a boring survey. Like, check in with folks, really tap into them. Be like, what do you want to see? What do you want to hear? And build with people and not for them. That's the thing, is like, we always just throw stuff at the wall, but we're not actually engaging with people in real human ways. And so even getting, like, we had a culture committee of folks who represented different communities or different departments within the company. And those folks talked to us about what the marketing team might want to see, what the HR department might want to see, and like tapping into people in different departments and planning around what experiences they're looking for can be super effective.
I love everything. This has just been such an insightful conversation. Like, I feel like I've learned so much in just listening to you all. And thank you all to the attendees for the questions that you've contributed and for the ideas that you've contributed as well. I'll add quickly to that point too, like to Jose's earlier point about ERGs really existing as sort of these leadership skill building accelerators and spaces. I think keeping alignment and staying tapped into what are the goals and OKRs of the teams and departments, what's the goals and OKRs of the wider company, I think can do a lot. If you can find ways to contribute to people's professional development and personal development and help them get closer to what they are getting paid for, then I think that is also a great way to keep employees engaged and within and beyond ERGs and these internal communities. So I know we're basically at time. My last sort of question, I know we've hit on a lot today. We've touched on a few common pain points. What keeps you here? What are your sort of words of encouragement? What keeps you motivated as you continue to do the difficult but also beautiful work of building community?
I'm a queer Black person. Like, I mean, like, I find joy in building intentional spaces where we can be ourselves and be our like most authentic and joyful selves. Like, those are the most energizing moments, whether it's in my community, whether it's in work, whether it's at home. It's just energizing, that feeling where you've created a space where folks are like, you can tell when somebody has thrown off the mask and they are just in themselves. You can see it. And there is no greater feeling for me. Like, of course, we should all be compensated above and beyond for that. But there's just like that joy of being around people who feel seen in their workplace for the first time. There's just nothing better than that. And yeah, like, I just love that.
Yeah, same. Plus one, plus the fact that there is just so much to be done in this space with all the communities. But I mean, I'm passionate about the Black community. So even just for Black people, or even Black people who from the hood, like who normally wouldn't get these opportunities to work at like a tech company or wherever, it's still difficult to get that representation and things like that. There's still so many things that exist that are problems in the space, even when you're at one of these companies. So when you're able to kind of check off a box and like an issue and really solve a community pain point, that helps. That's a great feeling too. But yeah, there's just work to be done. So yeah, excited to get to the work.
Yes. Plus one, as you said, just everything that you have all said today. Thank you again so much, Isis and Maceo, for this amazing and insightful conversation.